Thank you for inviting me. It's an honor to be here. I have spent the last 3, 4, 5 years trying to understand what is happening in climate change. There is so much misinformation going on, so much political aspects that it really took me about 2 years to wade through it. And it turns out not everything is what it seems to be. And that's not just from one side, that's from both sides. So what I'm going to try and give you here is, after looking through a lot of the science, of which I'm more a consumer than a producer, what is it that I have learned? I've also written a book that summarizes my knowledge, and I've distributed some here at the conference, together with a free corporate finance textbook, which of course I hope all of you are going to use to save your kids a lot of money over whatever Brealey and Weston and all these other books are actually costing your students. So climate change, are both sides wrong? I don't know how long my presentation is going to take. There's easily enough to spend 6 hours on that subject, but in 6 hours, most of you either want to be gambling or in bed. So what I'm going to do here is just do that in question-answer form and tell you some of this. The presentation is online, so you can look it up later on, and hopefully it'll give you an idea of what else there is that I didn't manage to cover. And of course, I wanted to have something like a gong that you can press when something is really bad and uninteresting. You guys are actually all too young. I'm now among the oldest here. There used to be something called the Gong Show, where if the presenters were really, really bad, the moderators would come out and hit the gong and the guy would be ushered off the stage. So I wish we would have something like a button you could all press that either goes next or go home. And then it would display this, and then I would know that I've really exhausted my welcome. Not having this, I'm just going to give it a shot. So the remarkable thing, the economic aspects of climate change fall into 2 categories. One is mitigation, the other is adaptation. Mitigation is basically how can the world reduce its emissions and thereby slow down climate change. Adaptation is, given that we're going to have climate change, and we will, what can we do to reduce the impact on us? I'm going to focus on mitigation, not adaptation. And there is remarkably little that there is worth disagreeing about. Now, there is nuances that we can disagree about and things that are philosophical and ethical, but they're not actionable. So when it comes to things that we can really do and ways that we can really influence how humanity should respond to global climate change, there shouldn't be very much controversy at all. And where there is, I'm going to try and tell you. The numbers I'm going to use is from the International Planet on Climate Change. They are the authority about climate change, so I'm not making up any numbers here. They have biases towards climate change as a problem, the same way that economists usually have the view that free markets are better. So they are relatively objective, but not perfectly objective. They have some biases, but it's not bad. And there is no other authority that you could possibly cite. These are the top Earth scientists in the area. There's also an IPCC policy body. Those are the people that want to be elected head of this, that go to the United Nations and are trying to get elected based on how much they advocate for. This is not the people I'm talking about. I'm talking about the IPCC scientists that are actually building models of Earth. They are actually pretty darn good. I'm sure that some of what I'm going to say you're not going to like, because it's going to contradict whatever preconceptions you might have about climate change. And let's face it, this issue is big enough that all of us have opinions and preconceptions about this. We've learned enough details in the media that we have formed an opinion. Everybody has one. I'm just trying to cut through this. I have no horse in this race. I am neither a climate denier nor am I a climate activist. I am trying to just get to the science here as objectively as I can. So the first thing is climate change real? Of course it is. Don't be stupid or political. It is happening. It has been happening quite significantly so, and it's going to continue to happen. How do we know this? I don't even need a strong theory to do this. It turns out NASA has satellites up there that measure how much radiation goes in and how much radiation comes out. We know that there is still more radiation coming in than there is going out. It's like a kettle that you have put on your stove, and it's heating up at the moment. So we do know absolutely climate change is happening. Do we know that it's anthropic, that is caused by humans? Actually, we do, because we know from the isotopes of the CO2 that's in the air that this comes from fossil fuels. But in a sense, that's actually irrelevant. If that had come from volcanoes or something else, it would cause the same warming. It doesn't make a difference. So we know that it is. This is a lot of the figures I'm going to just go over very quickly. This is the famous hockey stick, which is by a man who just won a court. This is from the year 600 to about the year 2000. This here is temperatures. You choose an arbitrary 0 point. From about 500 to about 1500, it was just varying around. Then there was what's called the Little Ice Age, mostly in Europe, but everywhere as well. And then since about the Industrial Revolution, it's been going up. In about 1980, it was about the same that it was before the Industrial Revolution. And since then, it's shot up like crazy. And it's going to shoot up more, another 1 degree. So this here is about 1 degree from 0 to 1. So think about this one here is going to go up more like here. Okay? It's coming. It's absolutely coming. Wasn't climate change worse in the past? Well, yes and no. So when you have climate deniers, they will very often show you pictures over 400, 500 million years. And aside the fact that we can't measure this very easily, you know, this was eras in which modern mammals did not exist. So this is not for us, and it's sort of silly to compare. Continents were different, sun was different, different things was different. And I'm going to show you pictures how it was different over the last 400,000 years. But all of this is actually totally irrelevant. Now, these are arguments best left to connoisseurs of the earth sciences. Why? Because we have no good evidence of causality there. Did temperature cause CO2 release, or did CO2 release cause temperature? So it's a simple identification problem. Over the last 200 years, roughly speaking, I have very good identification. I know that we humans shocked the CO2 in the atmosphere. We know what the theory says, what it should do in terms of trapping sunlight. And we know we can observe it. We actually see it in the data. So there we have very good identification. Now, this here is the last 500,000 years. It begins about 500,000 years ago to about now. Humans appeared about 300,000 years ago. And these here we actually have been in an ice age now for 50 million years. Ice age really means ice on the poles year round. Within ice ages, there are warmer times and colder times. Right now, we are in the warmest time of an ice age. And that ice age has been on since all modern mammals developed, which is really all that's relevant to us. Now, you can see that we had a pretty bad ice age around 25,000 years ago. About 10,000 years ago, the temperature has been quite stable. This here is CO2. The temperature has been quite stable. And this is also when all of modern civilization developed. Perhaps not by accident. Perhaps the stability of the temperature helped civilizations develop. Again, that's unimportant because humanity today has completely different technical means than what it had over the last 10,000 years. Have there been instances in which the temperature has increased by, this is -4 to 0, by about 3-4 degrees 0? Yes, there have been. So we have those degrees. We've had it from the last ice age to now, and we're going to go up to probably more about here. So they happened before. They happened when humanity was not that sophisticated. We were living in caves and clubbing one another to death, for the most part. Will we survive it this time? it seems exceedingly likely. So if you think that the world is coming to an end, it's not going to come to an end from all the evidence that we have. And I'll talk a little bit more about this. But we are at the warmest temperature for 300,000 years, which is here, and it's actually already below that going up, and we are going up like crazy. So it's unprecedented for the time for which humans have been on this earth. This is going to be the warmest that we've ever had. Okay, how bad will climate change be? Already from the beginning of the industrial age, which is partly because of the medieval little ice age, we've been increasing by about 1.5 degrees centigrade, Celsius. Now, if we are aggressively activists, that is, we really curb our emissions, we institute a lot of industrial curtailment, we have a lot of taxes worldwide, and everything comes true that people in COPA and the conferences are talking about, then we're going to go up another 1.8 degrees. If we basically do nothing and ignore everything, we're going to go up by about 2.3 degrees centigrade. Now, 0.5 degree centigrade worldwide is nothing to sneer at. The little ice age in the medieval age was about 0.4 degrees centigrade. Okay, so we're talking about making that kind of difference as humans. But it's 0.5 degrees centigrade, so we cannot stop global warming. Global warming is heading towards us. It's going to be big. And what we can do through curbing our emissions is actually quite modest. It's only the 0.5 degrees centigrade. Now, the International Panel on Climate Change also says, well, this may be roughly what's expected, but what if it gets a lot worse? We hit all the tipping points, this Greenland melts, this happens, that happens. They're not stupid, by the way. It's not like when I give this to audience, somebody will say, yeah, but what about the tipping points? You know, they've thought about this. They're not that stupid. If that happens, we might talk about 4 degrees centigrade warming of the entire Earth. That's huge. That's huge. Now, have we had increases like that? Yes, we've had increases like that. They already include all the feedback loops in this. That it's exceedingly unlikely this is going to happen, but it could happen. Okay, so what does 1 degree centigrade really mean? Because most people have heard it, it sounds large or small because, you know, the weather in the winter, it's 30 degrees centigrade colder. You know, what is this 1 degree? So let me tell you what this 1 degree centigrade is. If you look at a 2 degree centigrade difference for the temperature in a particular location, year round, that's about the difference between Boston, New York, DC, or Atlanta. That's what's about heading for us. It's also the difference between Stockholm, Berlin, Milan, Rome, Palermo, or Beijing, Tokyo, Shanghai, Hong Kong, Singapore. This gives you. What's avoidable? Avoidable 0.5 degree centigrade through active curtailment of emissions is about the difference between Queens and Manhattan, or the difference between Beverly Hills and Santa Monica. This here is a temperature of the world map, so what I've just told you, so Stockholm is here and Berlin is here. This is about the differences we talk about. A lot of this will actually get a lot hotter and everything will be moving away from the equator. Now, the scientists are not good at all about localized predictions. They cannot tell you that Berlin is going to get colder or warmer. They don't know this. The models are simply not good enough, and if somebody tells you this is going to happen, this is very, very highly speculative. Also, on average means, really on average, some places are going to have much stronger temperature effects. In fact, in the news just 3 days ago were some predictions that Europe could plunge into a new ice age, become more like Iceland, and its temperatures could drop by 10 to 20 degrees Celsius, centigrade, over by 2100. That's exceedingly unlikely. Is it impossible? No. I'm not an earth scientist. I cannot tell you, what it is, but so far the IPCC has never claimed until then that they can actually predict where localized things are going to happen. Where has it happened so far? So far, the red here is where the world has most warmed up. So this is already about 4 degrees centigrade. Europe heated up quite a lot more. Africa, the regions around the equator have not heated up as much. And Australia has heated up quite a bit. Now, the oceans also warm, but they do so a lot slower. And if you think you can do something about climate change in the atmosphere, forget about the oceans. The oceans are moving on century timescales. That's happening for sure. And no matter what we do, we can practically not influence this. Now, Steve Konin wrote a book in which he argues with the IPCC, does the trend line justify 50 centimeters or 80 centimeters? And you know what? That's a debate that's left to the connoisseurs of earth science. It doesn't really matter whether it's 50 centimeters or 80 centimeters when we talk about what we can and should do to slow down climate change. It's unimportant. It's coming. I'm not going to discuss other things like ocean damage, which are tremendous, or cyclones. It's all in my textbook, which is free online, which you can refer to. Just to give you an idea, this here is the last 5,000, this here is the sea level. This here is thousands of years ago. This here was the last ice age, 20,000 years ago. Real true ice age within ice age. The first civilizations appeared somewhere around here. So the oceans have risen quite a bit. For the last 5,000 years, they haven't risen much. And Konin is arguing with people about whether it's here or here. I'm trembling too much to actually show you what the difference is. But it's not, it's a debate that needs to be had among the scientists. To us, it's really not that important. But look at this. We were 150 meters lower in the last glacial period of this ice age. So another, whether it's 50 centimeters or 80 centimeters, by the end of this century, you know what? People will have to move away from low-lying areas. There's nothing we can do to stop it. It's going to happen. How bad a problem is it going to be in Manhattan? Not a problem at all. Even though it's incredibly low-lying, we are very wealthy. We have mechanical things. The Dutch have taught us over the last 200 years how to build up entire regions, and they did it with manual labor. Not just last 200, more like last 500 years. They've built dikes. Manhattan, we are wealthy enough, we don't have a problem. The problems are going to be in areas that are different, areas that are poor. In fact, a lot of the problems that we have with climate change is that it hits people that are poor quite a lot more. So, will it be a problem for the US and the European Union? There'll be some transition costs, but nobody so far is predicting major economic losses or other losses for the OECD at this point. It's just not there. Yeah, if you live in Malibu on the beach, it's going to be more problematic, but you'll survive. Where is it a big problem? A big problem for the world is where it's already hot, where it's very poor and very populated. So Singapore is not a problem, even though it's already incredibly hot and the weather is unbearable. Adding another 3 degrees centigrade isn't going to make a big difference for Singapore. They'll just crank up the air conditioning. It's already unbearable. Phoenix, Arizona, in the summer, it's already unbearable. But it's not a problem because they just crank up their air conditioning. Will it be a problem for particular farmers? Yes, some of the farming regions will have to move as they have in the past. Populated. So the Sahara has almost nobody living in it. Will it be a great calamity for the world if the Sahara gets hotter? No, it won't be because there's already virtually nothing there. Where it is going to be a problem is in the Sahel latitudes. So going from, say, Nigeria, Ethiopia, there is a lot of people that live there. In fact, it's about 1 billion people, forecast to be about 4 billion people by the end of this century. Okay? All the remaining population growth of Earth is going to happen in this region, and it's already incredibly hot, and it's going to be hotter. And for them, and they're poor, So they cannot easily insure themselves. So this is where climate change is actually going to hurt humanity quite a lot. So also some on the South Indian subcontinent, Bangladesh, southern India is going to be a problem. And then there are many uncertain places. Again, the scientists are not very good pinning down where it will heat the most, where it will not heat the most. Is it an existential threat? No. We've survived a lot warm, a lot colder. We've had 4 or 5 degrees centigrade increases. We lived in caves at that time. We managed to survive it as a species, as civilizations. We're going to manage another 4 degrees centigrade, especially with our modern technology. I mean, come on, this is nice. We will also not turn into Venus. Venus has 98% carbon dioxide. We're talking about 0.0008% versus 0.0003% carbon dioxide, which is big for us. Now, it could cause millions of people to die in the future, even if it's not an existential threat for humanity, especially in poor places in Africa and the Indian subcontinent, because those are the poorest places that are going to suffer the most if the temperature goes up yet some more. We also have lots of millions that are dying today there already. We don't need to wait for climate change. Climate change is the cherry on the top here. So poverty kills a lot of people every year. Climate change is going to make it worse. And the fact that it's poor also means that you cannot take countermeasures to protect yourself. No existential, no worry. No, that is not what I said at all. World War II was not an existential global threat to humanity. Okay? Nevertheless, it was terrible. And if we could have done things to reduce its impact, we should have. Malaria is not an existential threat to humanity, but it's terrible. It kills an enormous number of people every year. So just because something is not existential doesn't mean it can't be bad and that we should worry about it. So climate change is going to kill a lot of people. And we should think about what we can do. Now, whether you agree or disagree with me is actually not important either, because the actionable choices are the same whether you believe that it's bad or existential. I'm going to tell you that the world as a whole would be better off with fewer carbon dioxide emissions. And I'm going to try and convince you we want to smartly implement as much as we possibly can. And whether you believe that climate change is a lot worse than I think it is, or just bad, what we can do actionable is actually going to be the same thing. Is climate change a singular threat? You listen on the news and it looks like they haven't discovered anything else yet, which is remarkable. So ecosystem collapse, I think, is a terrible danger. This is caused more by the population explosion of humans than it is caused by climate change. Epidemics. COVID was bad, but there were far, far worse plagues during human history, and there's nothing that prevents a planet with 8 billion people that are living much more tied together to actually suffer a much worse disease potentially that actually could wipe out even our species, but certainly a few billion people. Nuclear war, that's something that could really kill a few billion people. Anybody heard about Apophis? In 2029, there's going to be an asteroid that's going to zip by inside our satellites, our human satellites that are going around Earth. If that had bent in a little bit further, just a tiny hair bit further, the impact power would have been the equivalent of more than all nuclear arsenals of humanity combined. We got lucky, this one's not going to hit us. Sooner or later, something like that will hit us, by the way. In fact, it's inevitable. It happened many times before. It will happen many times since. We have to worry about those as well. I'm worried as an economist about the falling cost of weapons of mass destruction. When religious fanatics can build weapons of mass destruction in their basements, we'll be in for a real problem. Some people think AI is an existential threat. And I'm listening to this and I think, what, you think ChatGPT is going to kill us? I mean, ChatGPT is like a bad research assistant on LSD. Really? But whatever you think, so there is, Pinker has written this beautiful book about angels of our better nature, which describes how much better humanity has become, how much less violent it is today, anywhere from wars, from domestic violence, how much more medicine and technology we have. In many ways, the future looks brighter than it ever has, and you should not listen to the news. This gives you a very biased image. What do we owe future generations? This is an argument that you sometimes hear. This is when people want to argue ethics, which is almost irrelevant to the subject matter, because what matters is not ethics, what matters is self-interest and how people will behave. But I'm going to cover it anyway. So they say we owe our children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren the pristine planet how we got it. Well, thank God the pristine planet is not how they got it, because if they did, our life expectancy would be 30 to 40 years. Most people would be continuously starving. We wouldn't be in Las Vegas in this kind of place. And if you want to see how it is, go to the really poor places in Africa, which is the poorest place in this world right now. It can be quite miserable. And by the way, even Africa is a lot wealthier than we were in the past, and how it has been in the past, because they have modern medicines, and famine only occurs nowadays in the world really where there's war-torn regions. With our fossil fuel ships, we have become very good shipping large amounts of grains to regions that are in dire straits. So famines killed millions every year. And whenever I listen to some of the heroes of the environmental movement, they think that climate change is about Sweden. And we sort of have to reduce the uses of our SUVs and our plastic bags, and somehow climate change will go away. This is not what it's about. It's about raising the living standards of 6 billion people that are not living in the United States, that are not living in Europe, and how we can give them the living standards that we have here. Because ultimately, if you are humanitarian, that should be what your goal should be. How do we make poor people more resilient? Fewer people emit less. That's certainly true. And richer people can do more. They also emit more. Now, if you want to do something about poverty, I'm afraid all these ideas that activists have, this is a very left-leaning movement in general, is that if we just had the idealized socialist communist world system, we could cure all the evils of this world. Unfortunately, capitalism, it's not fair, it's not ethical, it's not meritocratic, it's not defensible on philosophical grounds, but it's the only thing that has ever pulled hundreds of millions of people out of poverty. Nothing else ever has. So, climate change will hurt the poor, so will inefficient, stupid efforts to reduce emissions. Do not jeopardize better lives by trying to advocate for some world government that is idealistic. We tried this before. First, do no harm and try and do something good. Okay. How will it affect the world? Okay. So what will happen in terms of the IPCC estimates to our great-great-grandchildren around the year 2100 if we stop emitting carbon dioxide in large amounts, and it doesn't hurt technological development, because if it did, then all of this would be for naught, but let's presume we could do this. We do that intelligently versus we don't do this at all. And the answer is, on a worldwide basis, our great-great-grandchildren would be only 4.5 times richer, and if we did it intelligently, they would be 5 times richer. This is worldwide. This is not in the developed countries. The numbers are lower for the developed countries. Not my numbers. And so when people quote this, oh, we're going to have a 10% reduction in growth. Well, yeah, from 3.1%, to about 2.8%. It's very easy to misquote these numbers, take them out of context, and try to scare people with numbers that are correct, but at the same time misleading, especially if you don't know how to interpret this. Does this mean we shouldn't care? No, we absolutely should care. If we can do it smarter, we can get to about 5 times instead of 4.5 times. Maybe. We hope so. World War II did not end the world. We want to care smartly, and we want to care effectively. Should the world reduce fossil fuels? Hell, yes. Fossil fuels kill a lot of people. They don't do this by increasing the temperature of the Earth. They do that with their byproduct from these emissions, mostly particle emissions. So every year, fossil fuels kill millions of people. Until very recently, we humans did not have a good alternative energy source. Now we're beginning to have one. And so now is the time to wean ourselves away from it as aggressively as we can. We cannot do that too aggressive or too radical, because if we do this, we have something which is worse than a nuclear holocaust. Remember, fossil fuels power the world at the moment. We have 8 billion people living here. We couldn't feed them. We rely on fertilizers to actually grow our foods. It would be impossible for the Earth to maintain its 8 billion people at the moment without fossil fuels. But the time of fossil fuels is and should be ending as soon as we can. This stuff is not nice. And the people that are running those companies for sure are not nice, but I'm not worried about them. I am worried about what we can do for the poor people of this world and for us. Okay, so I'm not going to go over this. This slide actually describes where we are emitting, what the different greenhouse gases are. It's on the slide. Okay, should we reduce fossil fuels? Yes, we should do so intelligently. That does not mean spending millions of dollars on decarbonizing UCLA. I am sorry, UCLA is unimportant. We are tiny. ESG is unimportant. And I'll tell you why, and this comes in a moment. The entire United States emits only about 10% of the world's fossil fuels. The entire OECD is going to be order of magnitude about less than a third of the world's emission. 2/3 of the world emissions are going to come from other countries. The idea that, and lots of this is from private individuals doing things like heating their homes and driving. The idea that by convincing companies to to put solar panels on their roof or whatever, it's just ludicrous if you think that this is going to stop global warming. It's just not enough. The math does not add up. This cannot do it. At the moment, it's primarily a boondoggle for ESG consultants. And the sooner we stop this nonsense, the better it is. We should focus on stuff that can be effective in reducing carbon emissions, not in stuff that makes us feel good. Okay, it turns out that emissions are fairly predictable. They come from 3 components. This is an identity. There's nothing left out. Population, living standards, and technology. Multiply them together and you get emissions. Now, okay, what is the economic solution for climate change? Raise the price of emissions. In fact, this is what William Nordhaus won the Nobel Prize for, rightly so. He gave us an idea of if we were all coordinated, what would actually be, how bad is this externality that we're all ignoring? How much tax should we put on carbon emissions? And Nordhaus' answer is about $50 per ton of carbon dioxide. Could be about $100. You get different estimates. It usually publishes better in journals the higher the estimate is. So if you come up with a nice estimate of $500 per ton of carbon dioxide, Nature and Science will love you a lot more. But you know what? Oh, and this is how a typical model such works. So you've got technology and adaptation and consumption and all of that. It's irrelevant. Why is it irrelevant? Because humanity is not the Borg. Oh God, I'm so old. The Borg were a fictional creature in Star Trek, which actually had a hive mind and made optimal decisions. Among them, the best decisions for their hive mind. The world is not the Borg. The world does not have a hive mind. If you want to influence how much the world emits, you have to make it in the self-interest of actors to emit less. If you don't do this, everything else is babble. It's not going to happen. My running joke is that if you could cure climate change by having people go up and change the channel on their TV instead of using their clicker, this would be hopeless for humanity. Climate change would continue forever. People and nations are self-interested. You want to change the trajectory of the world, think about who is making decisions. It's also a simple but pervasive fallacy to engage in fruitless ethical should discussions. The OECD should give Africa $100 trillion for all the bad that they've done in the past, or for all the emissions that they've done, or for all this and all that. They are lovely discussions to have when you are an activist leftist demonstrator or you're in a philosophy department. They're not useful discussions to have if you're trying to figure out what can we do to make the world a better place. For that, we have to think about, again, what can we do to make people act in their interests in a way that helps Africa, India, Bangladesh, developing world, poorer world. It doesn't matter what is should, what matters is will. What can we actually do So instead, what we get is from the media every year, oh my God, climate change has gotten worse. We all lament, we pull our hair, and the next year we have a rerun. And it's been going like that for 10 years. So we've had this conversation. Even if you disagree with me, what do you think is really so different now from what it was 3 years ago? Well, 3 years ago was COVID. Everything was different 5 years ago. It hasn't worked in the past. Why do you think it's likely to work in the future? This, by the way, is the idea that the IPCC currently is saying about net zero, how the world needs to reach net zero by the year 2050. These are actually real predictions by the Energy Information Administration. This is a US government agency, not captured by the oil companies. It looks like it's going more like that and more like this, certainly nothing like this. So lamenting every year that we're not on path to zero is idiotic. This is not news. We've known this for many, many years now. Can we fix emissions? So if you look at us in 1900, these were the different continents. OECD, Europe, USA, this is population. We are a very small part of the world population in the year 2100. We're just too small. We're not that important enough anymore. You think you're that important here. We are not that important. And by the way, if you do this with emissions, we consume about twice as much as we should for our size. So you'd make the same thing, we would end about here. And all of that would be India, Asia, Africa, other things. You want to change the trajectory of worldwide emissions, you got to tackle that 2/3 of worldwide emissions. If you don't, you've given up, you've surrendered. You cannot cure climate change in the OECD. It's not possible. The only thing that's really relevant is not whether the OECD should pay other countries, but whether it will pay. And the fact is, we are not going to send trillions of dollars to India, China, and Africa. It's just not going to happen. And by the way, even if we did, chances are it wouldn't be used for climate mitigation. But you don't have to be Trump to win any US election if that ever was on the menu. This will never happen. Never. Get that out of your head. Can we stop it locally? No, you cannot stop climate change locally. No, UCLA is not going to stop climate change. Neither will Las Vegas. So the only thing that we have to think about is how can we help making it in their interest? And if you're talking to your relatives and they have these ideas about, most of our friends are probably liberals, and they have this idea that, you know, can we just make it happen? Think about what really has happened in the last 30 years. We've had treaties galore where people babble and promise things far in the future. But the way to explain it to them is this. Would the world be better off if the world did not have militaries and arms? The answer is yes. It would be much better off if we spent this on humanitarian causes. Will it happen? Even to them, it must be obvious that it's not happening. Why? Because it's not in the self-interest of countries and people to disarm. Then why do you think this is the case for not emitting carbon dioxide? Why do you think it's not, how do you think it works for militaries but not here? It's the same issue. It's not in their self-interest. Can finance and ESG help? ESG is not going to make a difference. We're just too small. The corporate sector is just too small. This idea, if everybody did it, is just sloppy economic thinking. We have to influence China, India, other countries systematically. It's not about us, and it's certainly not about the echo chambers that we have on the subject everywhere. It's not even clear, by the way, that ESG is helping reduce emissions at all. Not even about does it help reduce emissions a lot, but at all. It is not clear that it's managing to do that. Armies of consultants do not come cheap, and they consume a lot of energy as well. Can Newsom, this is our governor of the state of California, can he stop climate change? He is touting himself as the climate change candidate. He can tout himself as anything he wishes, but it's like touting yourself as the candidate for world peace. He's not going to do that because it's beyond what's possible. Green activists, for the most part, have their heart in the right place, but their brain is not in the right place. Because what they are advocating for cannot possibly make a difference. It cannot possibly make a difference. And there are things that can make a difference. Can technology help? This is the only way that we have figured out how to make it in the self-interest of people to skip over fossil fuels or reduce their fossil fuel usage. Capitalism and self-interest works. So we're having lots of companies now installing solar, developing solar, installing batteries, developing batteries. That's the one piece that's still missing. If we have a better battery, and they've been improving by about 3 to 5% per year, this is without any major breakthroughs. This is just continuing down the cost curve. In about 30 to 40 years, I know that clean energy can outperform fossil fuels. There's no question about this. What can we do? We can drive this forward faster. We can do impact investing, not ESG investing, to try and make a breakthrough in battery technologies. If we manage to do that, it's goodbye fossil fuels. At that point, fossil fuels will be useless. Okay, but to give you an idea how far we still have to come, this is world consumption. Biomass is basically burning of wood. This is coal, oil, gas. This is all of hydro, all of nuclear. These are our renewables. We got to get those to at least stay here and maybe even make it come down again so that it expands into what we as a world, as the 8 billion people of this world, soon to be 10, will will use for their energy sources. Now, clean energy. About a third is already or easily electrified. Things like ground transport, cars. Nobody is really developing gasoline engines anymore, not because they don't work or not because of any green activists, but the fact is electric cars are better and are getting better every year. And you can already see in 10 years, who thinks they will still buy a gasoline engine in 10 years? It's just absurd. We know batteries are coming down in price by about 3% per year. And if you look at how cheap the electric cars are that BYD is producing, now count in 3% reduction in the cost of their main inputs, gasoline cars are at the end of their lifespan. About a third is possibly electrifiable. So these are things like iron smelters. The problem with fossil fuels is, or the advantage of fossil fuel is, they are one-trick pony. They do one thing really well. They make heat. When you make electricity out of heat further, you lose about 2/3 of your energy. This is the reason why our electricity can so easily compete when it comes to electricity. But when it is to something that primarily needs heat, like high heat, like iron smelters, it's going to be really difficult for electric to compete. And then about 1/3 is completely non-electrifiable for the long future, like airline flight. That's just idiotic that we even are investing in that. This is such high-hanging fruit. It's crazy. Certain agriculture. Agriculture releases a lot of CO2. Now, what are electricity generation costs? It's about $300 to $400 per megawatt hour that you are paying retail today. Nuclear today costs about $100 plus per megawatt hour to produce. You know, nuclear was not killed by the Nuclear Regulatory Commission, although they've tried their darn best and made it really difficult, but it's in every country. It's not just in the United States. It's just incredibly expensive to build a nuclear power plant and operate it for 50 years. There is metal fatigue, there's insurance costs. You have to be safe. You cannot risk another Chernobyl. By the time you do all those things, you're talking about a minimum price of $50 to $100. What really killed nuclear was the cheap price of natural gas. That is what killed nuclear. Wasn't clean energy, wasn't the Nuclear Regulatory Commission, it was the cheap price of natural gas. Coal and oil have about the same cost. Nobody has built a coal plant in the OECD for the last, I believe, 30 years. It's just not economically viable. Solar and wind, if you're willing to take it when it comes, that is, it's not, you don't need to store it, you can consume it right on the spot. It's $40 per megawatt hour today, going on 20 in 30 years. That's the forecast. $20 a megawatt hour to generate electricity. That's unbelievable. The cheapest source of energy humanity has ever had. Add batteries to it, we are still at 120. We're still not fully competitive. In some regions we are, in many regions we are not. And it's going to go on 70. That's going to happen. Dumb ideas is usually what you get when you get government subsidies. So if you think hydrogen makes sense, it makes no sense whatsoever. It costs 10 times as much as nat gas. Even with all the breakthrough that people are touting, you might get down to about 2 or 3 times the price of nat gas. When nat gas is already available, why would anybody in a competitive market spend 2 or 3 times as much on their energy as they do on nat gas? Industrial CO2 sequestration, giant factories sucking CO2 out of the air. Yeah, we're going to start building giant factories where we pay a huge amount of money to suck out the carbon dioxide that China emits. Yeah, okay. Look, I'm not Trump, but even I could win a presidential election if the opponent was trying to do that. Electric aircrafts or ships. These are incredibly competitive industries. The margins are incredibly low. You're not going to be able to sustain yourself and be competitive in those things. And by the way, if you're thinking about building a nuclear power plant today, you have to count on 50 years of operations. If a new battery comes out, that nuclear power plant will never even open. It'll be obsolete even before it opens. An already built nuclear power plant in the United States today costs about $50 per megawatt hour to operate. And that's when you already have it working and already set up. I got that from Berkshire Hathaway. Who operates some? Are there other good ideas? There's many other good ideas that you could do. We have to build out the grid. That, of course, only works in the OECD. Plants, actually, are an amazing material. Wood, timber. You got to plant this stuff, and you got to cut it. You can't let it stand there. You got to bring IKEA to the rescue. IKEA uses this. That's really sequestered carbon dioxide. It's a lot cheaper than industrial sequestration ever will be. Oh, also, do not get yourself involved with stupid arguments about politics, about leftist versus rightist. All of that is really irrelevant. You want to get rid of fossil fuels? Talk about the particle emissions of fossil fuels and how they kill children and parents. This is what you want to talk about. This is what you want to emphasize. Don't talk about the United Nations. You talk about the United Nations, in every country, everybody is hostile. Cut that conversation. It's stupid. It's counterproductive, even if it's right. Oh, and write a free book and inform people who hopefully then will inform others, which I hope is you guys. So, what's important that's really changeable? Stop lamenting the unchangeable. Stop lamenting that the temperature is going up or that we are emitting that much. Yes, it's true, but it's not going to do anything. Stop confusing cause and effects. The COPA conferences, which, by the way, for the first time last year, acknowledged that fossil fuels have something to do with global warming. They hadn't before. They are not going to make a difference. The only reason why we now have hopes and all the forecasts are for fewer emissions is because clean energy has become a lot cheaper. Clean energy has become a lot cheaper. Start on smart strategies worldwide. That is, electrical storage. Start impact investing on that. Start on the business of implementation. Bring this stuff to all different countries in the world. And in contrast to what the activists are trying to tell you, get rich making the world a better place. Really, you would do a lot of good, a lot more good. Okay, so I guess this is the proper end to my story. The final music has been running, so the title music. Thank you for coming, and focus on the right things here. Thank you.